Hi friends, it's Chari. Today I'm creating a set of cards using a lot of backdrop sets. So let's get started. I'm using 4 different backdrop sets: the spring flowers, the tropical leaves, the snow flurries, and the fall leaves. And I've cut all of these from some white cardstock. And to color them, I'm going to be using my Copic markers. So I'm going to start with the spring flowers backdrop. This one will have the most colors, and I've picked 3 colors for each color family, and I'm just going to work my way around my piece. So to color these, I kind of picked flowers that were the same. So these 2 large flowers I colored in the pinks, and then the tulips I'm going to color in the pinks as well. And that helped me get a nice balance of color around my background. So for the yellows, I picked out all of those flowers that were the same shape and the same size. I colored the center with the dark color, then out from the center with the medium color, and then I'll blend out with the lightest. This is very rough coloring, and it gives that kind of watercolory look because the blending is not perfect. Now I'm moving on to the teal. I've got 3 of those shaped flowers. This is like a medium size. And then now I'm moving on to purple, and I'm doing these little branches where the leaves to me are kind of heart-shaped. I did the darker purple for the stem and then the lighter purple for the little leaves. And now I'm moving on to the green for all the stems and leaves for all the flowers. So I'm using a dark green and kind of coloring the center and up the stems of those tulips, and then I'll blend it out with that lighter green, and that will complete the whole coloring for this backdrop. I don't need to worry about the frame because I will be covering that up with a trim piece. Now I'll move on to my tropical leaves, and I'm going to use some different green color families for this one. I'm starting out with these YGs, and I colored the stem of these leaves, and again I'm coloring the ones that are all the same sort of shape. I colored the stem dark, and then I'm working out with a lighter. I decided to add a few more in this color family because I'm not going to have too many shades of green, and that one side right there felt like where this one kind of needed to be filled in. Now I'm moving on to some Gs. These are kind of more darker greens, less yellowy. And I only have one of this type of leaf, the one I colored in the corner, but I'm just going to move on to the opposite corner and color those 2 monstera leaves in that same color family so that I have, again, a nice balance of the color around my frame. Now I'm moving on to those little vines, and I thought these would be fun to kind of give a blue-green color to, just so we have a little more variety. I'm coloring up the stems with the dark, and then I'm blending out the little tiny leaves with the lighter. And then of course there's only so many of those vines, so I picked another spot to even out this color around and colored that other leaf. Now I'm back to my YGs, and I'm coloring in those sort of half monstera leaves, I guess. And I'm using some darker colors this time, so you can see the one right beside the one I just colored is the same color family, but I used lighter greens. And then finally, I'm going to go in with a really dark green and color these little sprigs that are sticking out on the sides. Now I'm moving on to my snow flurries, and I'm going to use 2 different colors for this one. So these B21 and B23, and I'm just kind of coloring the center of the snowflake with the darker and blending it out with the lighter. And I'm just sort of hopping around because I know I only have one other color I'm going to use, so I'm leaving some white spaces where that other color will be, and it will be more of a BG color. I'm also looking again at snowflakes that are the same shape and kind of coloring those the same because I know that the design has those shapes sort of evenly spaced around this frame. And then now I'm moving on to my BGs, and I'm doing the same thing here using the dark sort of in the center and then coloring out with the light. This is a very delicate die cut, so you want to be careful to not go back and forth and just kind of pull the color out from the center so that you don't bend any of these little pieces that are sticking out. And I know it's getting a little hard to see because I'm getting all that marker on my scrap piece of paper that's protecting my desk, but you'll be able to see these much better once I'm done. Moving on to the fall leaves. Of course, for this, I'm going to use some oranges, some reds, and some yellows. So I'm starting out with my orange. And I've just colored sort of the darker along those veins of the leaf, and then I blended out with the lighter. And for this one, I'm just kind of working my way around, kind of skipping some leaves, trying to make it even with the orange. I'll probably actually go back to the orange at some point to fill in, but this is a good way to get even color all the way around. And I'm using I'm picking different shaped leaves, as you can see. I'm not coloring all those maple leaves orange because there's some that are right next to each other and I want to vary the colors. So now I'll move on to my red, and you can see here's where there were two maple leaves right next to each other. And so that's why I'm coloring this one red. And for this, I'll just skip around just like I did with the orange, kind of filling in between my oranges with that red. Doing the same technique as I did on all the others, dark in the center, pulling it out with the lighter. And in my mind, I'm trying to leave some nice places for the yellow. I do like these little stems with the berries in the red. I colored the stem sort of opposite, lighter on the stem and then dark for the berries. Now I'm moving on to my yellows. So I'm going to work around and fill in with my yellow between my oranges and my reds I've already colored. And I missed a little of the edges of those reds. I noticed it when I picked it up. I could still see the white a little bit, so I just made sure that I had that covered really well. And then I'm actually going to go back in with the red and color those little stems that are left because I decided I liked those in red. I did try to do this one in the bottom in orange, but it didn't look right. So I went back and colored the red over the orange, and now they're all colored and finished, and we're going to cut these apart and mix these together all on one card, but I'll have enough pieces to create 4 different cards. For 2 of my cards, I'm going to be using the foursquare backdrop in landscape, but I'm putting it in portrait orientation. And this is going to cover up my backgrounds. Now you can see here that this is sort of the inspiration. I had these 2 pieces laying on my desk, and I thought they looked really cool layered over top of each other, like you were looking through a window that had flowers all around it. So you can see that you can pick just one backdrop and make a card, and it is also really cute. But I thought it would be fun to cut these apart and mix and match the backgrounds together to create kind of a all seasons window. I'm cutting all the frames from kraft cardstock and all the card bases from vanilla malt so it's cream, and that way all these bright colors for my backgrounds stand out. So first I'm going to be cutting each of these in half, and I actually measured and marked, but I didn't really need to do that because you're going to be cutting each of these at 2 1/8. So half of 4 1/4 is 2 1/8, and I'm going to start by cutting them all in half vertically. And I'm using this little Fiskars cutter that I bought because with these little pieces sticking out, I don't want to use my cutter with the slide. I was afraid it would catch on all these little die cut pieces. And this little tiny cutter works perfectly. So again, I'm just cutting each one directly in half at 2 1/8. And if you have trouble with measurements, that's where the little pencil marks work really well. And you're never going to see those pencil marks either. You could also just trim these with some scissors. You'll see me do that later on in the video when I cut some more pieces apart. So I've got them all cut in half. And then I'm taking one side of each one and cutting it in half again. I'm keeping one side whole, and you'll see why later in the video because I'm going to do a different kind of frame. But for these halves, I'm cutting them in half again. So half of 5 1/2 is 2 3/4. And once I have all these in quarters, you can see I'm going to lay these out, and then I'm going to move them around to get them in the corners I wanted. I felt like the flowers and the leaves were my most colorful pieces, and so like in this layout, they're either bottom heavy or top heavy or side heavy, so they kind of I wanted them to be in opposite corners. So I can use my pieces, kind of move them around, and now I've got them where I want them. So I've got the flowers and the leaves opposite corners of each other, and then my more monotone with the tropical leaves and the snow flurries in opposite corners. I'm just putting some liquid glue around the outside of the frame, and then I'll just line up the outside edge of these pieces with that frame. Now, if they aren't lining up perfectly where the two pieces come together, you can just trim a little bit off with your scissors, which I did have to do a couple times just to make them lay nice and flat. So like there, I trimmed a little bit off because it was overlapping my flowers and my leaves. But even if you have a little gap, you're never going to see that. Now I'm just adding liquid glue all around the edges of the frame, through the center of the frame, and then I've added little dots of glue to all those pieces that stick out from the frame so that everything is glued down nicely to my card base. And look how pretty that is. I really love all those colorful backgrounds peeking out behind that craft paper. Now for my sentiment on this card, I decided to add one right to the center in that circle. So I'm pulling out the Magic Messages stamp set. I'm going to white emboss the sentiment "Sending Big Hugs" on a piece of narwhal cardstock. So I already prepped it with my anti-static powder tool. I'm stamping it with the clear embossing ink, and then I'll use the white embossing powder. I do think that this card design could be used for any kind of sentiment, for any kind of occasion. I think it would be great for a sympathy card because I know those are always really hard for us to make. So I've just heated up that embossing powder with my heat tool, and it's all nice and bright and white, and then I'll use the coordinating circle die to cut that out. I'm putting some foam squares on the back, and then I'll just pop that right into the center of my card. And then to add a little bit of shine, I am pulling out some gold gems that I just have in my stash. Gold sequins would work too, or gold stickles, but I just thought this added a really nice sort of elegant shimmer to the card. And you're going to see me do this on all the cards so that they're all kind of consistent like a set. So as I said, I've got more pieces. Might as well use them and not let them go to waste. So for my second card, I'm doing the exact same thing, using those pieces that I had cut into quarters. And I'm doing the exact same frame, that foursquare backdrop in landscape. And I am making all portrait cards today, but these could easily be turned and become landscape cards as well if that is what you want to do for your design. And then of course I'm just adding liquid glue all over the back, and I'll pop it onto that vanilla malt cream colored cardstock card base. Now for this one, I used one of those pieces that come out of one of those squares that has the nice stitching, and I thought it would be cool to kind of put that in the center for a different kind of shape. I've got the Scripty Thanks cut from a gold glittered cardstock from the Autumn pack of sparkle cardstock, and then that little So Much comes from the Thanks, Thanks, Thanks stamp set. I've just stamped that in walnut ink, and then I'm just going to layer my Scripty Thanks above it. Now to keep this nice and sturdy, I actually cut out a second Scripty Thanks from that same kraft cardstock, and I'm going to layer that on the back and basically sandwich that rectangle between the two. This way I can pop up that rectangle with some foam, and then the pieces of the word thanks that are hanging off the sides are a little more supported and not just so flimsy hanging out on each side. So I've added that with some foam squares to the center, and then I'm pulling out those gold gems again. I am going to do a little bit of a different configuration this time, kind of going diagonal and putting some of those gems on that open space of that rectangle that I put in the center. Then they'll kind of fall off the top and the bottom into my window frame. So here's that second card using that same foursquare backdrop. For my next two cards, I'm going to use the peekaboo backdrop. So this one has different openings that are not all the same size. So what I'm going to do is lay that die cut background piece on my colored pieces and just draw a little tick mark with my pencil where they need to be cut. This is where you're going to see me cut it with my scissors. So like I used before, you could use the cutter, but I am going to use my scissors on this. I just thought it would be easier just to trim that off. These cuts, again, don't have to be perfect because you do have that frame to cover up whatever uneven edge that you're going to create. Now for this one, our pieces are not quite as interchangeable because we have a square opening and then a long rectangular opening. So I've just arranged my pieces where I want them, and I'm gluing them to the back of this using those longer cut pieces for the rectangular openings and then the shorter cut pieces for the square. But since I used each side and cut them the same, I'm going to have enough to completely make 4 cards and completely use up all of my background pieces. So I've got all those lined up. Again, adding all those little dots of glue to make sure everything will be nice and glued down to the background piece. This is that same vanilla malt card base. And you can see that this just has a really different look. Now for this one, I'm using that Scripty For You. I've cut it from that same gold glitter cardstock as that Scripty Thanks. But for this one, I wanted to pop it up, and I thought about putting it on a circle like the first card, but I didn't really like the way it looked. So I'm stacking some die cuts. These are all cut from that kraft cardstock, and I think I stacked about 5 of these. And then I'll put the glitter one on top. This will give me a really thick die cut sentiment, so I'll get the dimension that I wanted without needing to put something behind it. So once I have all those stacked, you can see how it really kind of picks it up off the background a little bit. I'll just add liquid glue to the back of it, and since this is going across the frame, you're going to see me put an acrylic block on it just to kind of hold it down just for a minute while that glue sets. And then I'm adding those little gold embellishments. For this one, I did the same kind of diagonal, not putting any in the 2 small frames. And I just think this turned out really lovely. Now to move on to our last one, I've gone ahead and assembled all those pieces in the frame and put it onto my card base. I've cut a stitched heart from some narwhal cardstock. I'm using that Scripty Love. This is cut from some white cardstock. I kind of wanted this to match the first card I made that had narwhal with white embossing. So I've got a white Scripty Love, and then I'm stamping the word sending, which is from the Thanks, Thanks, Thanks stamp set, just onto a piece of scrap white cardstock. And then I'm just going to use my scissors to trim it out into a little rectangular banner. So I'm gluing my Scripty Love to my gray heart, just kind of centering it up. And then the little sending banner will go to the top right, just above the V and the E. Then I can take the foam squares and pop the heart up in the center. And then I wanted to add some glitter to this die cut, so I'm using my Stickles glitter glue, and I actually went back and added a little bit to the sentiment of the sending big hugs so that these two matched a little bit more. I added it to the word big and to that little paper airplane. And then, of course, to complete the matching of these cards, I needed to add some of those little gold gems. I thought about changing it up and doing sequins, but I like the consistency of using the same embellishments on all my cards. So here is the first card we made, and the second one that both use the foursquare backdrop in landscape. And then here are the two cards using that peekaboo backdrop. So I used up all the pieces that I colored, all the backgrounds, for making all 4 of these cards. I really do love how these turned out, and I think that they could be used for any occasion with any sentiment that you needed. It would be really cool to like make some of these and not even put the sentiments on them until you needed a card for something, and then you could just pop a sentiment on there that fit the occasion that you needed. So I hope this has inspired you to maybe look at your background dies again and look at maybe mixing them up a little bit and seeing what you can create. Thanks so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.